This video is sponsored by Yellow Mountain Imports, the premier Go supply center for North America. For a limited time, you can get a 10% discount on any Go-related product with the discount code Sente10. The link is in the description below. Happy playing! Hello everyone, Sensei here, and I don't know what to say. The response to my last video was overwhelmingly positive. I really didn't think that y'all would respond that well to my video on the fundamentals of Go, but everyone wanted more. It was interesting because in terms of views, the video performed pretty poorly with respect to the rest of my videos in terms of like initial views, but the views that it did get really helped a lot of folks. So I think I'm going to keep going with that. I'm going to keep powering through this book and giving you all, I think, 10 chapters of this and learn a bunch of Go along the way. So I'm incredibly excited. I'm actually going along with you all in this book, really, because the last time I read this was so long ago, I barely remember any of it. So if you missed the first video, I am doing a Go book review tutorial on the fundamentals of Go by Kageyama. The first video is for the first chapter, and every video will be a subsequent chapter. You could find a link to that video in the description box if you're coming in late, but if you were here for the first video and you're ready for more, we're going to do cutting and connecting in this one. As always, I'm going to have to be dividing the video into segments based on the topic. If you're listening to a topic and you're like, nah, I kind of know this, not really for me, I want to see what else the book has to offer, just go down to the video time bar and everything's broken up according to topic, so you don't have to worry. Just hop around, do what you feel, see what feels good, and yeah, very excited to have you here. And one last thing before we get started, if you like this content, let me know, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. My social media links are in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen if you feel like following me on Twitch or Twitter or supporting my work on Patreon. So I hope that you have a great time here learning Go. It's one of my favorite games and, in my opinion, one of the greatest games ever made. And yeah, it's great to have you here. So let's learn about cutting and connecting, shall we? So the chapter starts off with a pretty neat example of fundamentals in pro games. It's a little bit disconnected, pun intended, from the rest of the material in the chapter, but I think it really does a great job to illustrate how important the fundamentals are. As we can see here, this is a game, a professional game, played a very long time ago, as you can tell probably some of the more experienced players by some of the josekis and shapes. Let me see if I can find the name. The person who played black was Kano Nindon, and he played this move, which caused quite a stir, apparently, in the magazines at the time of when this game was played. And some commentators in the magazines talk about how firmly this move captures the white stone, and wonders if the move would have been better spent at a point like A, surrounding territory more on a global scale while maybe sacrificing some solidity in the corner. And he sort of takes this into consideration to talk about how important the fundamentals are, because fundamentally, ensuring the capture of the white stone at this move is the proper way to eliminate all of the aji from this corner. If black does not do this, then white has moves like here, and then here, following up with here, and then here. And now there could be a co-situation. White might live outright. There's a lot of potential surviving aji in the corner, which the turn completely kills, at the expense of giving white an entryway into black's area. And of course, the trade-off between solidity and potential is something that many Go players struggle with, amateur or professional. But he goes on to stress how important that the fundamentals are in understanding where you are in your game and where you need to go. So if you do play this move, you need to understand that black needs to make about 50 points in this area to maintain equal power and to keep the game even. He needs more than 50 points to win. So that needs to be factored in their decision whether they want to curl and clamp on the Aji and eliminate it completely, or take a more ambitious and risky move by surrounding things on a larger scale with a move like A. A lot of players make moves without a firm grasp as to what they're trading away. They might not have enough points by connecting solidly, but do so anyway out of the faithfulness to the fundamentals. But they don't have a good grasp on their position, and then they don't have enough points to win. Or they have enough points to win, but they're paranoid or overconfident, depending on which way you want to look at it, and decide to play A here, risking the entire corner and the entire game on the ensuing Aji. So he goes on to say that it's very important to understand the fundamentals if you're going to understand the trade-offs you're making in the game. Because if you don't understand the trade-offs you're making in a game of Go, it's very hard to play in a way that consistently wins you games. The one thing he wanted to stress you should never do is play halfway moves. And I touched on this a little bit in the preceding video. A halfway move would be a move like, I don't know, like here. Something that is a little more solid than over in this area, but less solid than clamping. And what happens with these types of moves is, as I mentioned in the last video, you end up getting neither of the things that you were trying to hold on to. So with that prelude to fundamentals, we're learning the importance of decisiveness and understanding when something just needs to be done because it's that important to you, the fundamentals of Go. It's really interesting because in the previous chapter, he was very adamant to read out everything. You know, he was talking about people using silly ladder tricks, and the only way to know if a ladder works is to go stone by stone and read it out and read it out. And in this chapter, he starts off by taking the complete opposite approach to learning Go, and is just saying, in a situation like this, the cut is the only move. You don't even need to read it out. You don't even need to think about it. Just cut. There is no other move in this position besides cut. and very specifically emphasizing how little you actually need to read to play a move like this. He claims it is and I quote, "Cutting is the most basic tactic of all." He also shows this move as one of the most basic tactics, and says that in those two positions, this position and this position, cutting is the only thing to do. And now I know that the book might be showing a little bit of his age, because in the AI world nowadays, it's very common for white to actually leave this position and play somewhere else. That's a thing that has become very accepted in both the professional world and amateur Go now, as AlphaGo has risen in popularity. And so I just want to take this a little bit of aside to say that it doesn't necessarily mean what Kageyama is saying is incorrect. Cutting is still the most basic way to attack this group. If you want to take advantage of the weakness in white's shape, cutting is the only move. It's just that nowadays, AI and other players, it's possible to deem other parts of the board as worth more than this position. Because of the advanced Josekis, it is possible for white to salvage enough of this position to compensate for the advantage that they gain in some other area of the board. So now we are in this position, and white dared to play in another part of the board. The question for you, my lovely audience, is where should black play next? Give it a second, pause the video, and get back to me. Well, the more astute of you might be like, well, it's a chapter on cutting, so probably cut. And you would be correct. Cutting is indeed the correct move in this situation, but I guarantee you, and I know this because I would do this, that if I was not reading a book on cutting and I was just in a normal game, this option would be very, very appealing to me. Poking at the cut, allowing white to connect, and then coming out would feels so right for me, and I've done this so many times. But Kageyama really ripped out a new one for me with that philosophy. Because poking at a cutting point is completely against the fundamentals. You should always cut when you can cut. Have you ever heard that phrase, cut when you can cut in Go? And it's applying to situations like this. You should never poke or peep at a cutting point. Well, there are no nevers in Go, but you know, in the vast majority of cases, you should always cut when you can cut, not poke when you can cut. Does that make sense? He even says not to worry about reading. He says, don't worry if there's white here as a response or white here as a response. He says, as the position stands, cutting is the best move. But something that he doesn't really explain, and that's one part of the fun, in my opinion, of working through this book, is why. What is this fundamental aspect of cutting that is so brutal, and why is it so strong? The reason has to do with mathematics. It's essentially because, and this is my understanding, we're breaking from the book here to go to my understanding of the game, is that when you cut, you inherently separate white or your opponent into two groups. So when you cut, white has to be taking care of two groups while you only have to take care of one, which is this cutting stone. Cutting inherently creates a situation of miai, where no matter which way white decides to defend, you are attacking the other side. It naturally creates a situation where no matter what your opponent does, it is better for you to just go with the flow because they are hurting themselves either way. Creating a cutting stone and a cutting group is extremely, extremely efficient for your game because your opponent does not have enough moves to take care of two things at once. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule. For example, let's say that if you have a group that is incredibly, incredibly weak and you create a third cutting group and force your opponent to attack your already weakened group, that might get into some positional diciness. But in terms of the fundamentals of Go, into the isolation of groups and the understanding of groups as it stands, connected groups are worth their weight in gold, and disconnected groups are often a burden for the rest of the game. And it's very easy to just go with whatever defense white tries to do and attack the other side. Alternatively, if the situation was like this, now the peep makes sense. It's always good to peep when there's no possibility of cutting the group. Because, of course, if black tries to cut, then white just captures. There is no way. This group is connected. So it's good to peep, get a forcing move in, increase the ability of this group to make shape, and then come out. Or, even better, kick this stone and then come out. Starting to try to attack both of these groups at the same time. To really hammer home this position of fundamentals, the next diagram is literally called "Even a Moron Connects Against the Peep." So there you have it. If you don't connect against the peep, apparently you're a moron, I'm a moron, we're all morons. But this is really highlighting how important this principle is, and it makes sense. Can you imagine playing anywhere else and having white bust through your shape in this way? No matter which way black tries to defend, white is going to get something because they cut the group in two. And when you cut a group in two, it's mathematically impossible for the other opponent to take care of both of these problems that you've created at once. And so that is why even a moron connects against the peep. It's a little more obvious in this situation, but I think even in this situation, there would be some players that would be tempted to do something weird or fancy, maybe attach here, maybe go here, and that might work out in the Tsuji wise, but Kageyama is very insistent that this is the only move. This is the most solid move. It gives black the most options in developing outwards here, this way. It gives black options to perhaps counterattack. Let's say white lives here. It gives black the most options to sort of counterattack this white stone once black gets thickness. It is a solid and very, very good move. You'll be hard-pressed to go wrong if you play extremely solid moves like defending your cutting points. However, Kageyama does make the concession that sometimes in games shit happens. You can't predict always what's going to come up, and as basic as some of these fundamentals are, sometimes there will be situations where you might have to break them. Here is one such situation. White decides to activate a Ko sequence here. This Ko is huge. This Ko is a Ko for control over the entire left side of the board. In fact, whoever gets this Ko is going to be at a huge advantage to the rest of the game. Can you imagine if this entire group, upper left corner, was black's solid territory? White shape is cut in two. Black will have a great attack on this white group. It will be beautiful. However, if white got this Ko and ended up doing this, you can see how devastating that would be for black's position. Now these two stones are off on their lonesome, they're baseless, they're undercut. White will have a great time attacking these for profit. It's going to be a pretty sad time. Which is why this Ko is incredibly important. And we see the reasoning for the last example because white decides to try to play a pretty much the only Ko threat that white has, threatening to cut. And this is where you need to put your thinking cap on, because on one sense, yes, even a moron connects against the peep, but on the other sense, a bigger moron lets this entire group get cut off. So Kageyama actually says, and I quote, "When this kind of Ko arises in an informal game, my advice is to capture it A, and then while your opponent is thinking over their next Ko threat, fill in the Ko, and say to white, you can make any two moves that you'd like anywhere on the board." That's how huge this Ko is. There is no Ko threat that is big enough to sacrifice positional control over this left-hand side for. So given that, we know that black is going to not respond and connect here, which means white is going to play the same sequence that we covered in the last example and cut through black shape. And now the question for you, viewers, is what does black do now? Do they try to salvage what they can at A? Do they give ground with B? Or do they give ground in the other direction with C? Or do something else? None of the above. Pause this for a second, try to read over some options, and unpause. So, there's a lot of players, including me, who would play some sort of sacrificial play. Allow white to slice through, and then try to make their group live in this direction. Another option would be to sacrifice in this direction, and basically give white the corner, and then maybe take an extension here or something. Honestly, this would kind of be what I would play. Kageyama stresses, though, that this is not the fundamentals, because the goal of Go, one of the biggest fundamental parts of Go, is to try to preserve the continuity between your stones at all costs. And moves like B and C actively sacrifice that continuity for not much extra advantage. Neither of these moves give black the best result in this situation. And in fact, the only move is to salvage what black can and try to maintain the connection with A. And you might think, well, white's still going to cut, which is true. But with the addition of this stone at P17, when white cuts here and black defends, white still needs to make a security move so black doesn't recapture this white stone, which gives black the opportunity to take the initiative and, again, harass this shape in Sente, which means white still has to respond. If white decides to cut the other way, not a problem. White still needs a reinforcement move. And now black has a cutting point of their own to start a more larger scale fight at P14. So we can see in these sorts of situations that this position here is not as advantageous as this position here. Check out the difference between this position and this position. Just like burn that into your brain for a second. Here, 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 here. And the difference in between these two situations and why this situation is on average better is because black stressed maintaining connection between the stones. Even though the stones were cut, trying to preserve that connection allows black extra forcing moves. Forcing moves that they might not have gotten if they had just submitted and allowed themselves to be cut without a fight. So this is a little bit of a confusing sequence of problems because there really isn't a lot of information here besides how fundamentally important it is and how much better these two positions are. But after studying the positions a little bit, does it start to make sense? Are you starting to see how cutting things is just great and can split groups into two and give your opponent more problems to deal with than they can solve because both of you get one move apiece. But even if you do attempt to get cut, playing moves that preserve the continuity between your stones as much as you can affords you a better way to fight a disconnect. And it lets you be more proactive in the close combat fighting that naturally comes with crosscuts, that naturally comes with Ataris, with push-throughs. So if there's one thing to take away from this, it's that we don't want to be passive and just submit to the cut. And there's the next example will really, really hammer this home, and I think that'll start tying everything together for you all. So here we have a full board position, and whereas most people would just sort of see people trying to surround territory, Kageyama sees this as groups that are trying to stay connected above all else. The one space jump is a form of connection. The knight's move is a form of connection. The large knight is a form of connection. And I cover this a little bit in my Basics Go series, but this type of thinking of seeing groups not as ways to surround territory, but as a connection between stones, and territory as a side effect of well-connected groups, is one of the trademarks of an advanced player and sort of understanding group strength and weakness. If it's white's move and white were to try to attack, this would be a pretty simple answer, right, given what we've learned. But just take a second, think about what you would do to this white attack, and get back to me. It's pretty simple based on what we've been covering that the best answer is this. It preserves the connection between black's entire group. Not only that, but it creates cutting points that white needs to take care of at A and potential cuts at B. It's one of the only moves you can play, and after understanding sort of the fundamentals of cutting, hopefully no one's did something like this on purpose and allowed themselves to get cut on purpose, because that's completely against the fundamentals, as Kageyama would say. So we understand and we're convinced that, yeah, we want to try to preserve the connection between our groups and create cutting points for our opponent. But let's make it a slightly different situation, shall we? Let's have Blackstone here, Blackstone here, Blackstone here. And let's have white play... Now what do you do? Given everything we've talked about, given that we know that white is trying to disconnect us, what are our options, and what do you think the best continuation would be? Well, hopefully after our previous examples, we understand that when two stones are trying to be disconnected, fighting to preserve that connection generally results in our best options for the close quarters fight that will ensue. So this is a very common move and one of the only moves. Of course, there are many natural continuations of this. White could go like this, giving black thickness this way, and then coming in to stay alive. White could end up trying to slice through, but then things get a little bit dicey. White can try to wedge here, which again, in the spirit of trying to keep these stones connected, black's on average best option is to maintain that connection, giving white a capture in exchange for connecting those two groups. So there's a lot of ways that it can go, but those are all generally livable results for both sides. It's expected what might happen, and it's probably the best odds for black to get the best out of the situation that white is giving them. What we don't want to do is play moves like this. And this move, to a beginner and intermediate, honestly to me even, looks so good. You think, yes, we're attacking this white group. We are proactive. We're developing on here while attacking. But if we're trying to adhere to the fundamentals allowing white to cut our shape apart in this way is going to make things a lot more difficult for us in the long run. Because keep in mind, there's still Aji here. There's still a ton of Aji that lets white connect, wrap around the stones. Maybe white can come back out this way after a while, after a few jumps. Something like this. It's very low probability that white is going to die. And if it's a low probability that white is going to die, then allowing our stone connectivity to be hemorrhaged like this is losing us points, it's losing us strength, and it's giving us multiple problems that we have to worry about rather than just one problem. We can even look at this from a points perspective. Let's take the wedge variation that I showed you before. So like it goes here, 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 here. Okay? Black made 8 points. 8 points with this response. Now let's imagine the other continuation. Let's say white jumps a little bit. Say white does this. Maybe black does something like this. White comes back down. Here, here. Here, here. And then, I don't know, something like this. Right? Something super simple like that. Now, white made 2 points and took away 2 points from black's side that we didn't count before. And black has nothing here anymore. So that's 2 plus 2 plus 10, which is 12. So that's a deficit of 12 points that black gave up by allowing white to connect and sever their groups. So not even just from a group safety perspective, also from a point perspective, it is so much better to try to maintain that connectivity. Now, speaking of points, I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I think this really, really helps hammer this point home. And this is one of my favorite diagrams and demonstrations to do for beginner players. We're going to have a bunch of different hypothetical groups here. Give me a second to make them. And I'm gonna demonstrate for you how this works. Okay, here is the proverbial diagram worth 1,000 words. Here we have 5 groups, but we're just going to focus on these 4 right now. So just look at these. So black has 3 groups here. Black spent 25 stones to surround 3 sets of 9 points of territory. 9, 18, 27, right? The number of stones black used were 25. I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 25 stones total to surround 27 points of territory. White spent also 27 stones, but was able to surround 45 points of territory. The reason is because black's groups were disconnected. If you have a bunch of disconnected groups, you are likely going to lose the game. In fact, if you were to play through a bunch of games and count the number of disconnected groups each player has, on average, the player with more disconnected groups will lose the game for this exact principle. Because when you have groups that are disconnected, they can't surround territory as efficiently as one giant group. Black could instead use these same 25 stones to surround even more points than white if they utilize the corners. This is also using 25 stones. So I hope this starts to make sense that not only does disconnecting give you much better fighting chances against your opponent, not only does preserving connectivity give your groups a better chance to succeed, but mathematically keeping your groups connected creates a board state that allows you to capture more points more efficiently, using more points with less stones, just like we see here. And the last thing I want to leave you all with is a pro game that Kageyama played against his student. This student was a very, very high-ranking Dawn amateur player trying to go pro. And the student could normally beat Kageyama with 4-stone handicap, but decided to try to play a game with Kageyama using a 9-stone handicap. So Kageyama thrashed him, like completely thrashed this guy. and he thrashed him with 9 stone handicap against him using the same dissection and disconnection tactics we've been talking about this entire game. The reason that the amateur lost was because they were so busy trying to defend and play it safe because they had so many extra stones, they missed the fundamental principle of keeping your stones connected. And by disconnecting everything, Kageyama was able to force resignation and an eventual win against the student who was playing white. So I'm going to stop talking and show you a heat map of this game and have that be the closeout to this video. So this is the last you'll hear from me, but I hope you got a lot out of this instruction. I hope that this made sense. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, support my work on Patreon, get a Go board from the Yellow Mountain Imports if you want to. I will be back pretty soon with video 3, and I can't wait to show it to y'all. So I'm done talking. Hope you had a great time. Hope you loved this video. Roll the game.